Wendy Pavey, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been an absolute delight, and I have been really looking forward to this since we first connected on the good old LinkedIn.
Absolutely. I'm looking forward to our conversation, Carly.
And look, I'm actually going to start with something that I loved reading on your book, and very bold promise and very strong brand statement, dare I say. And it says, imagine if you never again had to apply for the job that you really want, but instead the ideal role is offered to you. Now, that is certainly ambitious and very bold. And so I think it really is, especially for those out there who are in a market at the moment that can be particularly challenging. But at any stage in your journey, if that was on the cards, one would be very, very delighted, I dare say, about that. So my question, and where I would love to start with you today, is what is this mission you on? What is it that you do to help people fulfill on that?
I think fundamentally what I do is help people tell the most compelling story of their career so that they do position themselves to attract this ideal role. I think that generally there is a lack of forethought and planning when we think about what's the role we would like to do, what's the role where we can have the greatest impact. We tend to be very responsive and reactive. Sometimes that works beautifully for people and they will say, oh, I fell into this and it was serendipitous. Yes, that can work, but often it doesn't. And if you are just relying on serendipity, then you might find that you're offered roles, but they're not really what you want to do. Or you're not offered roles, and now you are in the very uncomfortable position of having to go and ask people for roles. And then you don't have choice.
Mm.
And what I want is for people to have choice, is to be able to say, this is the kind of work that I do best, where I can deliver the highest value outcome. And that's the work that I want to do. When you can bring those two together, well, that's your ideal role. And it's also the role you'll be most successful in. So
Mm.
it is that process of what do you say? There's some self-reflection in what do I do best? What is my value proposition? And then to proactively go into the market and say, who are these people that I can do this for? Let's begin these conversations. Let's position myself as somebody who really knows how to deliver this outcome. So it's a shift away from the let's just see what happens in my career to let's do what we can to shape our career. You can never plan it down to you might start out thinking, oh, I want to hold this role or I want to work for this organization. Well, that may or may not happen. But it's better to be working towards something specific than saying, oh, well, let's just see, where the wind blows me.
So I think it sounds very clear. Certainly, the role of career strategist, which I know that you include in what you do. But what I'm fascinated in is actually especially, you've written a book called Personal Brand 101, and the way in which you're going about helping people fulfill on this kind of outcome is in the area of personal branding. Dare I say, having been somebody who's worked in branding for many, many years, I understand that, it's not always a universal definition of branding, but could you perhaps give us your view and definition of personal branding?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, personal branding is a really vague term, and it's like a magnet for fluffy explanations of what does it actually mean to have a strong personal brand. But for me, personal brand there are four components to it. It's knowing what to say, it's knowing how to say it, it's knowing how to show it, and then how to be seen. And that model, which I call my say, show, seen model, to help you remember it, is really, what are you going to say to these people, and how are you going to demonstrate your credibility, and how are you going to be connected to the right people? Those are the elements of an effective personal brand. And notice the personal agency that there is there. Again, this is you saying, this is how I want to show up. This is how I want people to perceive me. And then you actively put those elements in place. That to me is the definition of an effective personal brand.
Mm. And how is it that you made this shift into personal branding? Because, you carry 30 years of experience in, brand focused communication with big brands where I dare say, you have a big impact in the world. What made you decide to go down this path?
Well, working for those iconic global consumer brands, it's actually a really close parallel to working for leaders, because those big brands, you think about it, they are our biggest advertisers and sponsors, because they know that to stay top of mind with the consumer, you've got to be in front of the consumer all the time. Otherwise, we forget about them, or someone else new and shiny pops up and we think, oh, well, I'll get that instead. I'll try that instead. It is actually the same for senior leaders. They need to be constantly in front of these decision makers with these messages so that they are thought of when an organization is looking for a senior leader, looking for their next CEO, or looking for someone to be on their board. So they actually, it's the same thing. They might seem like they're worlds apart, but I think that was the realization that I had, working for some of those iconic brands like Apple and Gillette and Gatorade. They have to invest a huge amount of money in staying top of mind. But what I see our senior leaders don't do, or leaders of any kind don't do, is put that same effort into making sure, am I visible to the people who can offer me that ideal role?
In fact, I do know you said in your book that you tell people that actually you're not getting the roles that you want has nothing to do with ability. So what does getting the right role have to do with?
It's not ability, it's visibility.
Right.
And more than that, it's that intersection of being visible and being valued. It's making sure that it's not just you popping up. For example, it's not just you liking lots of things on LinkedIn. It's about how can you balance that with communicating value. So instead of just randomly liking 100 things on LinkedIn because someone has said to you, this is a good thing to do, but it's about making thoughtful comments on LinkedIn posts. It's about doing your own posts where you communicate that value message, where people get an understanding of what it is you do, what is the value that you deliver. And those two things, visibility and value, they are interdependent, and they need to be balanced, because you can't just be visible without the value. That's just noise. But equally, if you are busy delivering valuable outcomes, but there's no visibility of that, that is silence. And that does not get people offering you your ideal roles.
I can see how you were saying before about the parallel between big brands, and I guess I think it's potentially why, for me and many others, why Apple stands out as having been such a successful brand. And even in the absence of the person who founded the organization, it's become the biggest brand in the world for that reason. It's very clear about its proposition. And so when it comes to personal branding, let's just, I suppose, put the spotlight on how people go about this, because the thing that really strikes me, Wendy, is that branding, simply put, is ultimately about knowing who you are, what you're about, what you do in service, what your value proposition is. And, and that does sound very straightforward, and it is very straightforward. But I know, and you raise this in your book, that when you ask people to rate themselves on the things that actually create and establish the foundations of a brand, that people actually rate themselves very poorly. How is it that we rate ourselves poorly on something that is about ourselves? How does that happen?
Well, I think it comes back probably to that passivity and that reactive approach that we take to our careers. I mean, there's a lot of things layered in here as well. It's like, why don't people put themselves forward for leadership roles, for example? Why don't people like networking? I thought this is a fascinating area to me because it is so fundamental, and making sure that you know people and they know you. I mean, how can someone offer you a role if they don't know your name? But for some reason, we are not taught any of this.
Yes.
People just have to discover it, and often they make this realization in moments of career adversity, where you've been overlooked for a promotion, or you've applied for jobs and never seem to make it to the short list. You've been made redundant. There's been a merger. All kinds of things happen, and I think we've all either experienced that ourselves or someone close to us has experienced those things. And then you suddenly find yourself in this horrible position of, I need work. I need paying work because I have to pay for my life. And I don't know how I'm going to do that. It turns out I don't know anybody and they don't know me. And the saddest conversations that I have are the ones with people who are in this horrible sort of pit of silence, where they're trying so hard, but because they haven't developed that compelling story and they haven't nurtured a network, they are really struggling to find themselves a job.
Yeah, I hear a couple of things actually. Firstly, which I want to get onto after next, is so what do you do? Like, how do you go about that? But before we do that, was just reminded then about not only, I suppose, through adversity, but as you know, global workforce statistics on the level of dissatisfaction that people have in their jobs. And, as you were sharing about that, I then kind of wondered whether also it's being in a job that you're not happy with can also be due to not being clear about your own match. So if things fit well together when you're clear about there's a good fit between the brand and its consumer, but potentially if you're in a job that you're constantly dissatisfied, potentially that you not being clear about your own brand and where your value sits is potentially at the heart of that. Do you find that's the case?
I think that's right. I think you've hit on something really important there. One of the components of a brand story is purpose, that sense of why am I here? What am I doing? And another component is value. Those two things are inextricably linked, because if you are just delivering value but it's not meaningful to you, then that's ultimately not serving the organization. And if you're doing something that is important but it doesn't deliver value to the organization, well, that role is not going to continue. So at some point, someone is going to go, well, we don't really need Kylie in that role. And that can be absolutely blindsiding, to be in that position and think, but I've been doing such important work. But it didn't link back to value to the organization. And so that's why you weren't retained when there's some, redundancies or whatever the situation might be.
I mean, it also points to the fact that I think it's very easy then to be at the effect of the decisions that get made in the organisation. And if you do not have clarity for yourself about all those aspects, that does leave you at the effect of it and no clarity. So for those, certainly, given that we know a lot of people are unclear about these things, how do you go about building your personal brand? Where do you start?
For me, as I said, I have a model where it has 6 components, and the first of those components is value. I mean, we have to be commercial about this. You're paid to do a job because you can deliver a certain outcome, and to have that test of what will people pay me to do? What is sufficiently valuable and meaningful that I can be paid to do it? Has got to be the starting point. I mean, it sounds a bit brutal, and I know particularly perhaps younger people can have that feeling of, I want to do work that is meaningful, important, and that is creating a better world. For sure, we all want that but there does need to be that, yes, this organization is delivering this particular product or service into the market, and there's got to be that sophisticated understanding and alignment with it, or you're not going to be a credible candidate. So we are functioning in that commercial corporate environment. And of course, people are going to be looking at the experience that you have and the skills that you have to see if it lines up with the job that they need you to do. The next thing to think about is, well, what's different about me? And this can be really, really challenging for people. I understand. But if you think back to, we're talking about brands, and why do brands exist? Well, they exist to help people choose between things that are fundamentally the same. You think about all cars do the same thing. So we have these different brands which mean different things to us. And there needs to be some differentiation. The more that you can create a meaningful point of difference, so again, something that links back to value, the better able people are to say, well, we want Kylie to do that, because if we get Kylie, she brings these qualities, these abilities to the role. So of course she stands out. That's just the perfect choice for us. It's easy. Just in the same way as those big consumer brands that I worked on. It's like, well, they all have competitors in the market. Of course they do. And ones that are equally as cashed up and as visible in the market. Why do you choose one over another? And the better that reason is articulated, people will say, well, I buy brand X because of this reason, and become very loyal to those brands, often in the face of not necessarily rational choices. If you think about the times that you've seen someone appointed to a role and you've thought, how did they get that role? Well, I can promise you it will be some point of difference that's linked back to value, where the organisation is saying, oh, this person can help us do this thing, even if that wasn't identified in the job description. But that person does such a good job of telling their story in an interview. It's like it's sold, job done. We pick Kylie because we get these things. And to the outsider would be thinking, but she doesn't have my, 15 years of experience doing this. Guess what? Your 15 years of experience don't matter, because you were beaten out by that compelling value proposition and a meaningful point of difference.
I was. You remind me of a story I was reading about the founder of the program Survivor, the reality TV show, who's now, as you can imagine, a billionaire in the TV industry in the US. But I believe he was previously in the military, and when he moved to the US, he pitched on this concept. But when he first moved to the US, he landed, and his very first job was a nanny, and he had no experience as a nanny. He'd come out of the military, but they talk about, in fact, it was a story about being able to tell a compelling story as your differentiation, right? And they were saying that, it was the story he told about how he would make a really great bodyguard for the children. And so safety and protection overruled the fact that he'd never used a dishwasher. And I just thought that's a remarkable example, right? Of if you are very clear about how you can be of service and help someone and what makes you unique and valuable, it certainly makes the story far more compelling.
Absolutely. And that is a beautiful example that you've just provided there. But that's not uncommon at all. To the outsider, they can't understand why this person would be given a role. And it is quite galling for someone who on paper looks like they tick all the boxes. But it's often not enough. I fully appreciate it. It's hard to come to terms with that, but that is the reality. And the more competitive the market is for that role, the more senior often. There's far fewer CEO roles than there are broader C-suite roles, and there's far fewer C-suite roles than there are middle manager roles, of course it's going to get more and more competitive at the pointy end.
Mm.
So the better you're prepared for that, then the more successful you'll be.
Mm. So going back to some of the preparation, you were saying the first thing was values, then you go on to what makes you different and or unique. What else should they be looking at?
Well, you absolutely do need to be able to articulate relevant experience and skills. And what's key here is that you are aligning them to the organisation that you're interested in. I think often we're reluctant to be specific because we think, well, we're closing ourselves off to opportunities, but it doesn't actually work like that. When you can tell a really convincing story about why you would be good working for a certain type of organization, you'll find that conversations move where people say, well, we're not in that sector, but gee, we really need those skills, or we need that outcome. Do you think it's applicable?
Mm.
And then you can say yes or no as you choose if you're interested in this organization. There's a real sometimes this is referred to in marketing terms as having a niche, and that can be very off-putting for people. They think, oh, I don't want to close off opportunities, but it isn't about that. I mean, I
Mm.
know a great leader could lead any organization, in any sector, because those skills are, they're infinitely transferable. But
Mm.
that isn't a very compelling value proposition. Or we'll say, I can do a great job for anybody, anywhere, anytime.
Mm.
Whereas someone who says, I can effectively lead organizations that are in a mature industry that are ripe for disruption,
Mm.
and talk about that in a way that gives you that strength and confidence, and you can give examples that people are going, that sounds really good. It's actually the impression that you create as opposed to the specifics that you're
Mm.
giving, because it's clear you speak with confidence and authority, and that sense of assuredness that comes through. That's what's powerful. It's not about the specific wordings, because people who like what you're saying will say, well, ours is not really that kind of thing. It's this kind of thing, but it makes perfect sense what you're saying.
Mm.
And now you think about the power relationship in that conversation. You don't want to be the person saying, please may I have this job. You want to be the person saying, let's see if we're a good fit here.
Mm.
And that sort of, calm confidence is so much more appealing than the person who's desperate to say, oh, here's what I can do. That's exactly what you need. That's too eager, and that isn't powerful.
Mm. Given that we're on the topic of experience, I love one of these comment that you make also in your book about how to make your assets, how to make an asset out of your career detours or disasters. And I just love that. And I was like, oh, this is really good, because there have certainly been times, and I've taken detours, and I've taken a big detour and change over in the last 15 years. But as you go for interviews, it certainly sounds like it makes sense to reflect on these things and actually see them as opportunities, not as obstacles. So how do you do that? How do you turn your detours and disasters into assets?
Well, it's really looking at what you learned from it, and how that has, how you bring that forward. It's never about pretending it didn't happen. In fact, the worst thing that you can do is just hope that no one will ask you, because in any interview or any career conversation, you'll have that little monkey on your back saying, I hope they don't ask me about why I had to leave that role after 9 months, or I hope
Mm.
they don't ask me about why that business went bust, or whatever the circumstances might be, because that is undermining that kind of confidence that we've just been talking about, where you bring that power and that authority to a conversation. I often take clients through a not very happy process where I call it the hostile interview. And that's where I say, so Kylie, you left that role after only 9 months. What happened there?
Mm.
You want to be able to say, whatever the reason was. So there was a mismatch between the expectations of the board and what could be reasonably achieved in the time frame.
Mm-hmm.
We prepare an answer that doesn't gloss over, we're not trying to pretend something didn't happen. Maybe we say, I overestimated my ability to pull that organisation out of a precarious financial position, and it went into administration. Since then, I have worked hard on developing my financial skills. I have done this course, or I have developed, I've gained this experience. So that situation will never repeat itself. So we're not about pretending it didn't happen or that we didn't make a mistake, but we're about, here's what I've done to mitigate the same kind of thing happening in the future. Here's what I learned. Here's what I brought forward. It might be nothing more than, to say to an interviewer, you've picked on the one thing that went wrong in a 25-year track record of success. But let's talk about it, because here's why I'm a better leader now, because I made that giant stuff up. So it's really about, what is the flip side? Something I really enjoy doing, and transformational for people who are feeling apprehensive about, I have this thing that I don't want anyone to ask me about. It's like, well, I'm going to ask you. And what's more, you're going to get comfortable with it. And that interview will hold no fears for you.
Sounds like a really great exercise to do, simply identifying all the things that you don't want people, or you're scared that people will say, or scared that by being able to prepare for those things.
Absolutely. I mean, it sounds so elementary when we
does.
say it like that, but we don't do it because sometimes we don't want to face the reality of, I made an error of judgment. I made a mistake. And yet that's this human existence that we are. We all make mistakes. I mean, I could give you a catalogue of my mistakes. We'd be here for a long time. Anybody can do the same. Show me the leader who hasn't misjudged a situation, who hasn't put their trust in the wrong person. I mean, everybody's got that story.
Right.
Why would we pretend that hasn't been the case?
Yeah. You remind me, there was a time when I was in the transition from my corporate career, and I was looking at what my next thing was going to be. And in trying to work that out, one of the things that I had not done and over my career, which is always something now that I'm, saying to people that even I coach, is to be capturing your success stories. And I started to lose sight of my value because I hadn't really ongoingly been managing the reflections on my own success stories. Now, that seems pretty obvious now, but certainly back in my day, but as I was in the early stages of my career, there wasn't as much, there's not as much competition or what it was, but developing your CV on an ongoing basis just wasn't that thing. And I had to go through this exercise. Or someone suggested to me, why don't you go back and just rewrite your resume and, put in all your accomplishments? And I was like, because it had been such a long time, it was really, really difficult. But one of the things that I certainly learned out of that was that, and I've seen this time and time again with others, is that often we're our own worst critic. And when we look back, we have a habit of looking at things from didn't do a good enough job, or we don't reward ourselves or give ourselves enough credit. But in fact, that process can often highlight that you're doing a much better job, and there are really valuable lessons in being able to do that reflections. How have you noticed that occur for people? Like, do you notice that actually doing those kind of reflections opens up a completely new view on their strengths and what they're capable of?
It does, and it is a really good habit to deliberately, at the end of every quarter, whatever the appropriate interval is to write down what you have accomplished, because you do forget. Or just over time, something that seemed a big deal at the time, you start to discount it. And it just means that you're not prepared with being able to tell the story of those successes. So when you're in conversations, you want to be able to remember, oh, yes, so 6 years ago, we were in a similar situation, and here's the problem, and here's what I did, and here was the outcome, which is so valuable to be able to draw on a breadth of successes that you've had. There's a deeper issue here, though, and it's to do with generally we are very concerned about appearing to be boastful or to be bragging. I think so often I hear people talking about humility and the importance of being humble. The problem with this is that there is a spectrum of ways that you can talk about yourself, and bragging and boasting is at the end of the far end of that spectrum. The trouble is, though, is that we see almost any communication about our successes as bragging and boastfulness. So we overcorrect massively, often to the point where we say nothing. So there's this huge spectrum of things that you can say or do, things that you can post on LinkedIn that are perfectly acceptable, that no one would consider to be boastful. But because we're so worried about it, and we're like, oh, I've got to be humble. I just need to sit here and do a good job, and I will be recognized for that. It's like, I know you will, but you probably won't.
Yeah, this is another point I loved in your book. You said, you tell people, don't think good work will automatically be rewarded. And I thought that, look, it seems very obvious, right? But I want to ask you why you say this, because I noticed even for myself, I was like, yeah, that's obvious. But at the same time, I have been somebody in my career who, my career happened because I was headhunted for every job. So I was tapped. I my attention was just on doing great work, and as a result of doing great work, I did get rewarded for it. At the same time, I'm like, well, just having your attention on good work doesn't necessarily land you rewards. So why is it that you tell people this?
Well, I think the point that is important there in your experience is that there were other factors that enabled your good work to be recognized that perhaps you weren't aware of. So you had a manager who could see your good work, and that manager said, well, Kylie is fantastic in that role. We're going to give her this additional responsibility or this promotion. There was some external factor that you don't have visibility of. And sometimes those are the things that are completely out of our control. There'll be people listening to this who have had managers who they feel sure would not put them forward for a promotion because they feel they would be competition. So, or maybe there's some other personal reason you think, I will never get promoted in this role because that person does not like me. Conversely, you might have a great relationship with a manager who says, the work you do is brilliant. You need to be having a bigger impact. We need you in a bigger role. And they help you, that, they're that sponsor, that person who helps elevate you. I mean, if you haven't got those things in place, if you haven't got that person who can put you forward, well, how will it happen? And that's what, it's looking at every individual situation and saying, what are the factors surrounding this? Have you got that person? Do you have a supportive manager in your organization? Are there places for you to go? Or are you someone who the organization is going to say, whatever we do, we need to keep Kylie in that role because she is fantastic, but they're never going to promote you because they're like, they don't want to lose you. They want you to keep doing that role. Now, that's actually really short-sighted, but nevertheless, that's what organizations do. And again, we've all seen that, where that's like, we've got you, we want to keep you, but we're not necessarily going to give you pathways upwards, or certainly not outwards.
You remind me, I think, that if we go back to the concept of branding, that really great branding is actually what people say about you when you're not in the room. at the end of the day. And if those conversations, because those conversations are certainly what has the impact on the outcome of your career, and whether you like it or not. So if you sit back and you don't have a say about it, then you're letting other people make those decisions for you. So
Well, absolutely. And something that is so important, I think, was it I can't remember who it was who said that quote about it's what people say about you when you're not in the room. But a key part of the story that you develop is that you make sure the people in your network who are able to recommend you or refer you, that they know what that value-based story is as well, so that they can connect you and introduce you in a really powerful way. I mean, for me to say, oh, you should speak to Kylie for that. She's a great person. Well, that isn't particularly effective. Whereas if I can say, I've seen that in that role, Kylie was able to turn around an underperforming division and now they're contributing 20% of NPAT or whatever it might be. Now that's powerful. People don't want to employ you because you're my friend. They want to employ you because you can deliver a valuable outcome. So it's not just sitting back and going, oh, gee, I hope people say nice things about me when I'm not in the room. Like let's give them what those messages are. And it's everything is going to work so much better when you do that.
Yeah. So once you've gotten clear for yourself, so let me just go back to get two things. Firstly, I want to get clear about just the simple things. What are in that first step of getting clear about your own brand, those things that people should get clear about? So you've said about the differentiation, the values, and their experience. Is there anything else that they should look at?
So in my executive cadence model, there are those 6 elements: value, experience, skills, successes, difference, and purpose. And that is the foundation to draw out a range of messages about your career that then you can adapt to any situation. Once you've got that story, and that's the what to say element of that model that I explained to you earlier. Once you know what to say, then you can think about, well, how do I say that on platforms like LinkedIn, which is the first place anyone goes to find out more information about you. How do I say this on my resume? How do I say this in conversation with someone who might turn out to be influential? Then, how do I show it? So showing it is all about credibility. It's like, it's one thing for me to say it, but then if you go to my LinkedIn and you can't see any evidence, then that undermines what might have been a really positive impression. And people find themselves thinking, well, she talked a good game, but I can't actually see any proof of it. We live in this age of online verification. And if we can't verify someone successfully, then we don't trust what they've said. And we don't offer roles to people that we feel that sort of nagging sense of mistrust. And then how to be seen. Now, that is a sequential model, because it is really important that you don't work on being seen, on being connected to influential people until you've got that story straight, until you've got it expressed well on LinkedIn, until there's evidence of your abilities in some way that people can find. Because if you organize a conversation, if you get a referral to somebody and you're fluffing around with, oh, I think I could do a pretty good job for just about anybody, you've potentially blown the one opportunity that you had to impress that person. You need to get those elements in place before you go out to your network. People I've noticed tend to want to have conversations with recruiters, and they're not prepared for it, and it doesn't go well. And it can be a really damaging experience, that you're thinking, oh, all I have to do is impress this recruiter and they'll pop me into some position. But the recruiter's just thinking, why am I talking to this person? And
Mm,
that's not going to go well. It'll damage your motivation and your self-esteem and your desire to to go and have more of those conversations. So getting
mm,
those pieces in place, absolutely fundamental.
yeah. So any piece of advice, I suppose, or given what you've seen are some of the obstacles that most people deal with when it comes to this, and in order to help them, take that next step wherever they're at in this journey.
It's always to face it, face what you think the issue is. If it's that you haven't done any formal study since your undergrad degree 25 years ago, well, let's do something about that. Let's tackle it. And that can be
Mm,
done in a variety of ways. If you think you don't have a compelling point of difference, well, let's not just blow past that part of the executive cadence model. Let's go. We'll have to create one, and I've done that for many clients who've said, "Well, there's nothing special about me." Well, we, I'm sorry, but I can't have that. We're going to work on creating
mm,
something for you that is going to deliver value back to the type of organization that you want to work for. It's really that,
mm.
let's deal with it, let's tackle it, and you will feel so much better. And it's always about being proactive. I don't like my clients applying for jobs. I really don't. It's such a
Is that
it's
right?
such a hit and miss business.
Right, right.
There's no, for all the advice that you might get on, this is the sort of, there's people are employed for a whole range of reasons that might have nothing to do with the role that's being advertised. And to put
Wow.
yourself in that pool of 200, 400 people, who knows how many applicants there might be for that role, and you have got
Mm,
no agency whatsoever. I don't like that.
mm.
I don't like that.
So if that's not the option, what do you
Then you
suggest?
proactively work out, what's the kind of role that I want to do where I can deliver these high value organizations, and what's the type of organization that I can best do that for. So that's our objective. It works like a GPS. To say
Mm,
to sat nav, take me to Melbourne, uh, who knows where you're going to end up. If you say, take me to 500 St Kilda Road, guess what? It'll take you directly to the door. So you
mm,
need to put that work in. And this is not about, narrowing down my options. No, it's about having that credible presence so that people can be impressed by you, so that people think, well, Kylie sounds terrific. We need her working for us. How can we create a role for her to do this thing that she says she can do? That is
mm.
the pinnacle. That is what I always strive to achieve for my clients, is what's your dream role and how do we make that happen?
Oh, I love that. Speaking of pinnacle and dream role, I know you've got another book coming out very soon. What's the next book about?
So the next book is called Advancing Your Advisory Career. And it is for the person who wants to make that move to the portfolio. So no longer a full-time executive role, but a mix of perhaps a board position, perhaps some advisory roles, a little bit of consulting, mentoring. Look, there's any number of options that can comprise a portfolio career. But absolutely, that is about being able to pick and choose. What do I love doing? What's the work that is my great work in the world? And being able to design your life in a way that perhaps 25 years ago we just couldn't do. But that is beginning to comprise the majority of the work that I do now. Instead of people saying I'm
Mm,
CEO of company X and I'm looking for my next CEO role, they are saying at younger and younger ages, I don't want to do this anymore. These demanding executive roles are destroying relationships, they're destroying my health. I actually want to have that flexibility and that freedom. It's a different market though. So it's not about, you need to market yourself, you need to put yourself forward in a different way. And often this is something
mm,
that's completely unfamiliar to people. So, and without some guidance, They might have a few stabs at it, but if they don't succeed, then they just end up retiring, which is an unconscionable waste of their experience and their knowledge and the wisdom that they have to impart, that they want to impart, but they haven't been able to find an avenue to do it. So the book is about, here's what I call minimum viable marketing. What is the least that you can do
Love that.
to
Yeah.
create this portfolio career for yourself?
That's fabulous. So before we complete, it's been fabulous talking with you today. So just do really want to thank you for sharing all of your gold nuggets, really. I like to have you end the interview on a statement. So I'm going to read you the statement, and if you can complete what it means to you. And that is, a leader is someone who...
To me, a leader is someone who can hold that expansive vision, and then they can align other people underneath that vision, so they can get everybody on the bus. They can even people who might be reluctant, or who are, diversity of people, is that we are coming together to do this thing, and hopefully that there's some important purpose that underpins what the organization, and it isn't just something like make a lot of money. It's something that people can feel inspired by, to make a difference, because that's ultimately what most of us want to do. We do want to make a difference. We want to leave the world a better place. And I think for me, that defines a leader. And you don't have to be the CEO to be able to do that. It doesn't always have to be, I often say your purpose doesn't have to be about curing death. It's fine for it to be something modest, something that is little, but it's still significant. And if you can bring your team, or bring your suppliers, your contractors on board with that, that to me is the essence of great leadership.
That's really beautiful. And now, how can people go about finding you, especially given that you've got a couple of books on that are very, very helpful? Where's the best place to find you?
So the books are available. So the Personal Brand 101 is available on Amazon, and Advancing Your Advisory Career will be available on Amazon after May the 16th, 2024. My website is yourexecutivebrand.com, and there's a wealth of resources. You can also find me on LinkedIn. And on LinkedIn, I do a regular Q&A blog. People can submit questions, which I will get around to answering eventually. And I'm always happy to be connected to people.
That was right. Drop it right off at the end. So we'll have to make sure we stitch that bit. But look, thank you so much for joining me. And I did notice throughout your book was absolutely scattered with lots of really great resources. So we're going to put the links to where people can connect with you into the show notes. And I certainly recommend people go and take a look, because the practical application of your work is really outstanding. And thank you again for joining me. It really has been a very enlightening and rich conversation.
It's been my pleasure, Carly. Thank you.